We are now very close to approaching our first stop, the Fantoft Stave Church. It's a 2 to 3 minute walk to the actual church inside of these woods, but the way to the church has been paved in a quite comfortable manner. And once we will be there, of course, I will report with the ticket office to let them know that we have arrived, and they will give us the chance to go inside as well. But it is worth knowing that what you are about to see is something quite unique, given that there used to be more than 400 stave churches in Norway in the past, and only a little bit more than 20 of them are left. So I would argue this is definitely one of Bergen's gems, and by far also one of my favorite locations to visit.
To the Fantoft Stave Church. Now, why don't we define what a stave church is to start with, right? A stave church is a church that is entirely made of wood without the need of a single nail. Wow. Everything is a structure of interlocking wooden pillars. We like to call it the former IKEA. In such a way that, as you can see, there are several pillars interlocked, keeping everything beautifully together. And the separate roofs that you saw even from the outside are somewhat placed on top once the structure of the pillars on the inside is stable and placed as well. So almost as a unique piece, like a hat that's put on top of the church. And this, as far as the church of Fantoft itself, proved to be actually a very also useful feature, because this church was actually not always here. It was originally built in 1170 in the village of Fortun, which is a bit further away from Bergen. And it was there up until the 1800s, when a law passed that basically forced churches to have a bigger space sort of for the people who wanted to come here and actually follow religious ceremonies. And therefore, Fantoft was, in our case, the Fortun Stave Church, was too small. It couldn't accommodate for enough people. And it would have been demolished, we could say, under the threat of this law that had passed. But there was a local consul called Consul Fredrik, who had quite a bit of money and an interest in preserving this church. And so what he did was that he had it moved to Fantoft, right here where you see it today. And the fact that it is made in such a way actually proved to be quite useful to sort of disassemble, right, the church in different pieces and then put it back here all together the very same way you see it today. Now, it's worth mentioning that the original building of the church was made by Vikings that were Christianized. And so by all means this was a Christian church, but one that, as you might have seen also from the outside, has a number of Viking folklore elements. You might have noticed at the very top of the church, and you will once again when you exit the church, these dragon heads that are placed at the top, right? And you can even see in some of these sort of carvings, some creatures, especially in some of the benches at the entrance. Well, these are all part of Norwegian folklore and sort of the pagan past that the Vikings used to worship. And even though at the time they had then become Christian, and this was a Christian church, they still incorporated some elements of their culture into these churches. And when it comes to the dragons specifically, they were actually a positive symbol. They were said to hunt away evil spirits. But it's fascinating to learn that it was not only this law that threatened the demolition of the church, it was also the fact that after the Reformation process of the 1600s that saw Lutheranism and therefore Protestantism becoming the main religion in this country. A lot of these churches were considered not Christian enough in terms of the way they looked. And so that is the reason why so many of them have either been demolished or wildly modified, right? And that is the only reason we have so few to this day. And then there is a bit of a sad fact regarding the Fantoft Stave Church. It's quite unbelievable to think that it survived so many years. It survived a relocation, it survived 2 world wars, but unfortunately it did not survive arson. In the 1990s, in fact, someone who has not been identified to this day actually burned part of this church down on purpose. Oh. And it was, of course, a devastating loss. This happened in the early 90s, so not too long ago, and very little of the church was left after the fire. Some of its structure was saved, but it simply wouldn't have been enough. It wouldn't have been stable enough to support sort of a refurbishment, and so it was completely rebuilt. But what you see today is a one-of-one faithful replica of what the church used to be before, of course, this fire. And that is the reason why we have fences around the church, for example, today. And then as we will leave, you will be able to see on a little tree stump just outside of the entrance, there's a little roof, a small portion of a roof, I should say. That is one of the few things that survived the fire and that have been sort of preserved to our day. And then last but not least, of course, it's also worth mentioning the peculiar black sort of look of the church. I always say that every time I turn the corner in this wood, I feel like I'm in a Brothers Grimm fairy tale, right? This has the look of a peculiar house. And the reason why it's black, it's quite simply because the wood that was utilized to build the church would be chopped down, carved, and slightly burned and left to dry out in order to make it more resistant and also termite resistant, given that it was a bit burned. And then once it's placed, it's also treated with pine tar, which is something that you will see also on many tiles of the houses, of the Norwegian houses, which is the material that allows it to basically be preserved and saved from weather effects. And of course, we have already talked about the notorious amount of rain that falls in this area, and so that certainly helps. I would now like to give you the time to take a few more pictures, and then on the way out, of course, I will be waiting just outside if you have any more questions relative to the church, and perhaps you'll also get the chance to see, as I mentioned earlier, the dragon heads.
Carvings, I know some of them must be modern.
Well, yes, they are modern, as in they are the ones that happened after the fire, but they are all a replica of the original ones that were made by
Go for it. Oh, yeah. Cool. When I stepped in, I'm like, there's no way this thing was actually like from the Viking era. It makes sense.
The wood smelled too good.
Yeah. Walk through the woods again. No. Why would you want me to troll? What do you think? That was pretty impressive woodwork. It must be cooler than the replica that you've seen before, since you don't remember that you saw a replica.
Where's that?
What?
Where's that?
Where was the replica? Outside the line for the Frozen ride in Epcot.